Welcome to Now You Know BC. I'm Bob Kronbauer, also known as BC Bob, and on this show I introduce you to interesting people, places to go, things to see, things that have happened in the past. You will hear our collective stories. This week I'm talking about Japanese Canadians and mostly their internment here during World War II. It's not as light and fun as most of the episodes I brought you so far, but it's very important and you're definitely going to learn a lot of stuff you didn't already know. So let's dig in. Did you know that the P&E was once the site of a massive incarceration camp for Japanese Canadians that were being unwillingly sent to internment camps during World War II? It's true. It was during a very dark period of the Second World War when every person of Japanese descent living in Canada had to register with something called the Registrar of Enemy Aliens. This included Canadian citizens who made up the majority of people who had to register. The livestock barns at the P&E grounds, you know, where you go to see all the chickens and llamas and fluffy animals now, those were buildings that were converted into a sort of staging area where thousands of Japanese Canadians were brought when the government said anyone of Japanese descent couldn't live near or even be near the coast. Men were assigned from there to go to road camps and women and children to ghost town detention camps. And some families were kept together as they were assigned to work at beet plantations and other farm-type places. These were located in the interior of BC and in the prairies. In the end, more than 21,000 of our Japanese Canadian neighbors were uprooted from their lives on the West Coast. Most of them had their land and other property, such as boats, taken away from them, never to be returned. Again, these were mostly Canadian citizens. In 2021, the P&E announced that they'd committed to turning a portion of the livestock barns, where the staging area was, into what's being called the Japanese Canadian Interpretive Center, to tell this story and others of the people and to the people of BC in one of the places that they happened. The idea is to educate people so that we can make sure nothing like this ever happens again. I've got two guests on the show today. Masako Fukawa is going to take us through her personal experience, and Kayla Isumura is going to show us a video and photo project that she undertook recently where she challenged fourth-generation Japanese Canadian folks to pack their most important belongings as if they were getting sent away in 2 days, which is exactly how much notice the families had in the 1940s. And they were only allowed a couple bags of belongings each. We're also going to go on a road trip to a very important museum that you've likely never even heard of, but that you need to visit. And now you know. My guest today is an award-winning educator and historian of the Japanese Canadian community. She's written multiple books about Nikkei fishers on the coast, one of which won Canada Council's Canada-Japan Literary Award. She was awarded an honorary doctorate of law from Vancouver Island University in 2023, and she's just written a new book called Stories of Nikkei Canadians, which tells us all about Japanese Canadians in BC. Masako Fukawa, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here, Bob.
So
Okay.
I know that Steveston was a Japanese fishing village, but I don't know that most people know that when you go there. Can you tell us about that?
Well, actually, in 1942, when the Japanese Canadians were all relocated from the West Coast, Steveston was a flourishing community. In fact, two-thirds of the people living in Steveston were of Japanese heritage. And they had a community that started, well, when my grandfather immigrated in 1893, it was a small community with just a few Japanese. But by 1942, there were 2,000 Japanese living there. And they had, Christian churches, a Buddhist temple, Japanese language school, and a hospital.
Right, the hospital.
Yes.
That was the feature that came because Japanese Canadians didn't feel comfortable going to the normal hospital?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. I know my grandfather post-war, even in the 1960s, he would say to me, he doesn't want to go to the hospital because you go there to die.
Wow.
That was his remembrance of being ill.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that hospital actually was started because of the typhoid epidemic in the late 1890s. And then it became, it was taken over by the Japanese Canadian Fishermen's Association in 1900 and built a hospital that was in operation until the 1950s. Even when we were in internment camps, the hospital was being operated. And it wasn't, I think the Richmond Hospital didn't come into being until the 1960s. So
Okay.
it has a fantastic history, right?
Yeah. And your father was born there?
He was born there. He was born in 1906, I think, yes. And the hospital was open to everyone. And what's really fascinating is the fact that it had a hospital insurance program where you paid a fee and then everything was covered except for certain surgeries.
Oh.
Yes.
And this was before
Tommy
healthcare.
Douglas
Wow.
in Saskatchewan.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So I look at it as the first medical insurance program in Canada. So there was lots for Japanese Canadians to be proud of in Steveston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then internment happened. Your
Yes.
father went to internment?
Well, actually, he was separated from the family and he was sent to a road camp.
Yeah.
He was a fisherman. He had a new boat built in 1938, I think it was. In 1942, it was confiscated and sold.
Yeah.
And then he was sent to a road camp, leaving my mother, myself, and my brother behind to look after things.
So you went to internment camp?
Yes,
How old were you?
I was 18 months old. And so at 18 months old, I was labeled an enemy alien.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
I was born in Prince Rupert. My family home was in Steveston. And at 18 months, my brother was 6 months old, and we were labeled enemy aliens. I wasn't an enemy,
Yeah.
and I wasn't an alien.
Kidding.
I was born in BC,
Yeah.
right? So that's how we ended up in Greenwood, a ghost town.
Oh, in Greenwood. Okay.
Yes, that was turned into an internment camp. It was really the first internment camp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is fairly recent history. You went to internment camp, but I feel
Yes.
like a lot of people don't know this history. How did you do your research for it? I mean, obviously you lived it, but there are so many stories in your book.
Well, actually, I didn't know anything about Japanese Canadian history until I was at UBC, and I was in my third year when I was given an assignment, Japanese Canadian internment, and it was the first time that I saw anything in print that said Japanese Canadian, right?
Uh-huh.
So I was curious, and I went into the stacks to look for material, found Pierre Burton's article in the Maclean's magazine, and the title was "They're Only Japs."
Ooh.
That was my impression. But then, as I was scared to read the article because I thought, oh my goodness, what did my parents do, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then, but the curiosity got the better of me, and I kept reading. And what he was saying was, he was being sarcastic.
Oh.
Yes,
Okay.
thank goodness.
Yeah, wow.
I know, because that was the prevailing attitude at the time, and
Yeah.
he was making a comment about that. And so when I went home that evening, I said to my parents, why didn't you tell us about what happened? And they said to me, for the sake of the children. Kodomo no tameni, they said to me. And they said, we didn't want the children growing up bitter over things that they had no control over.
Okay.
So that's why they remained silent. And it was only when I kept asking them that they revealed some of the things that happened to them. Yeah.
Yeah, so that seems to have sparked a lifelong interest in the history and spreading the history. And Masako's book is out now. It's called Stories of Nikkei Canadians, Resilience in Struggle. We're going to the streets. Nina is going to talk to some people at the Nikkei Center in Burnaby. Welcome back to the show. We're going out to the Nikkei Center to talk to some people and learn a bit about Japanese culture.
I'm Nina Savage, and this is Street Survey. Today we're here at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center to learn more about Japanese Canadian history and what the folks here are doing for the community.
I am a museum assistant. I help out with museum exhibition tasks, as well as the gift shop and education assistant as well.
What do you do here at the Nikkei Center?
I used to do gymnastics, but now I don't do it, but I still do Japanese class.
What brought you today to the Nikkei Center?
I want to take this workshop because I really like to eat sushi. Yeah, but this one is more complicated, so I want to learn to have more skill, for cooking.
And why did you want to take this class today?
Ask my mom, I don't know.
I thought we fun to do it together as mommy and daughter things.
And how are you liking it so far?
Good.
Why is it important to have an education center for Japanese Canadians here in BC?
For the education department, it's especially important to share Japanese Canadian history in BC. Prior to the war, there has been a lot of Japanese Canadian background who supported the neighborhoods of Vancouver.
I think it's important to let people be aware of it, and then they can participate, and it just makes people more accepting of other cultures because Vancouver has a lot of diversity. And my parents came over a long time ago from China for a better life, and because of them, me and my brothers and sisters have a better life.
So not everyone knows about the history of the Japanese in BC or Canada. What is there to learn here at the Nikkei Center for outsiders who may not know?
Whenever we introduce Japanese Canadian history, it starts off with who were the pioneers, who were the first to immigrate, and how did they build their lives in this new land, and how they overcame challenges during World War II. And despite all of the injustice treatment that they faced, what kind of resolvements were made leading up to the current day.
What was it like volunteering here?
It was very good because I get to see all kind of things here. I get to see the atmosphere. I meet all kind of new people here, and also everyone is very nice. So I really like the culture also from the media, and also I get to discover new things every day.
And what have been some of your favorite workshops and programming that you've done here at the Nikkei Center?
We do the one.
Japanese class, that's your favorite.
We do the tea ceremony classes. They usually offer more regularly. They haven't had it for a while, but I love that.
What kind of recipes and dishes will you be bringing back to your home cooking here?
Well, I like to cook as a hobby, so I've made sushi at home before, and we've made ramen soup and whatnot. And so I got some ideas of making some different foods, and I bought some Japanese cookbooks as well.
Other than the educational aspect of it, there are also archival and research services that we offer. Anyone who wants to dig deeper into the history and looking into archival material is always offered, as well as the programs for arts and culture, and then seasonal events as well.
And what would be your travel advice to someone who's headed to Japan soon?
Probably find out what the weather's like, and also do some research about the country.
Can you say something to me in Japanese?
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Oh, that's really good! The Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center offers a variety of ways to experience Japanese culture. Stop by when you can. This is Street Survey, and I'm Nina Savage.
We're going on a BC road trip to a place called the Sunshine Valley that ironically has a dark but very important past. This is not the typical trip that I take you on here on my show, but this area is beautiful and you're probably going to want to stay out here. The Sunshine Valley is just 20 kilometers east of Hope, about 40 kilometers before you get to Manning Park on the Crow's Nest Pass. You could do this as a day trip from anywhere in the Lower Mainland, or you could stay out here. When I went, I stayed in this log cabin that you can book at liftylife.ca. It was way, way bigger than I needed, and the views here were way better than I had even anticipated. And there's some casual trails that you can take on a small lake right out the door. It's just really peaceful, even though it's right off the highway. There's a bunch of cabins nestled at the bottom of the mountain here. Across the road from the cabins, there's a place called the Sunshine Valley RV Resort and Cabins. They've got places to stay, as well as a pool, a general store that has beer, and fire pits. Walking distance from here is a place called the Tashme Museum. It's on the exact site where Canada's largest Japanese-Canadian internment camp operated during and after the Second World War. It was 1,200 acres, and previous to the war, it was actually a ranch. In 1942, the government built a bunch of tar paper shacks that housed people here, and it was sort of set up like its own little town. A few years back, a guy named Ryan Ellen bought one of the old buildings, which was actually the former butcher shop on the site. He restored it, worked with families and folks who were interned here, along with a number of different agencies to fill it with stories of what was once here, and most importantly, about the people who were here. Next, he built a life-size replica of one of the tar paper shacks that the residents lived in. He filled that up with artifacts from the era. And after you go through the museum, you step inside the shack, and it oddly feels really warm and cozy. It feels like you're being welcomed into the home of some Japanese friends in the 1940s. And I mean, you basically are, but these were not charming places to live in. And the novelty, it very quickly wears off when you learn that the government made it so that the minimum number of occupants for each shack was 7 people, and up to 12 people would be packed into these places, which were under 400 square feet in size. Picture that, an apartment, 400 square feet, 12 people. When you go outside the museum and outside of the shack, there's a memorial garden with more stories, and it's a place to reflect on all of this. Now, Tashme sounded like a Japanese name to me, but it's actually a combination of the first 2 letters of the last names of 3 security officers who were responsible for the camp, basically the cops. You're gonna learn facts like that, but there's plenty of uplifting stories here as well. It's not all gloomy. And if there's one thing I've learned from the Japanese Canadians I've met while researching for this, it's that they haven't let this era define them. They endured it all with dignity, and in the decades since have rebuilt their communities and contributed to Canadian society in too many ways to count. But you'll learn about some of those ways here at Tashme in the Sunshine Valley. You'll learn even more of them at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby, which we'll visit again in a future episode. And now you know. This piece of history is proudly supported by the Museum of Vancouver. Vancouver's story begins here. We're back at the Museum of Vancouver for a piece of Vancouver's history. Usually we do it in the basement in the collection storage. Today we are upstairs looking at this wonderful exhibit that was put together by Kayla Isamura. And what is this?
Yeah, so the Suitcase Project is a multimedia exhibition with photography, video, interviews, all focused on the experiences of 4th and 5th generation Japanese Canadians and Americans, who for most of them had ancestors who experienced the forced uprooting of Nikkei people along the West Coast in 1942.
Mm-hmm. And so you approached these people, all types of different people from the States, from Canada, and gave them the same notice that they would have got if they were getting sent to internment camp. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what the assignment was to?
So the original intention was exploring this question on thinking about what our grandparents and great-grandparents would have packed with them during this time, but also thinking about what they would have left behind. So the photographs and the video were all taken in people's homes or sort of personal spaces. And they were given this notice, which was the notice that people would have received in 1942, telling them how to pack, often going to a place where like they didn't know where they were going, they didn't know what the conditions.
Where did this come from as an idea? How did you bring it to life? Because it's a traveling exhibit. It started at the Nikkei Museum in Burnaby, and it's here now.
Mm-hmm.
How did it start?
Yeah, so this was something I first took did all the photos and interviews in the beginning of 2018. So it's been quite a long time that the exhibit still stands and has been able to travel throughout Canada and also be on display in the US. And the project idea for me came from thinking about that question around what my grandparents and great-grandparents would have packed with them during the incarceration. But also, again, like I said earlier, so like what they would have left behind. For people, specifically Japanese Canadian history, people weren't allowed to return to the West Coast until 1949. So they were forced to move east of the Rocky Mountains or be exiled to Japan. And during the time that they were incarcerated, one of the big differences with Japanese Canadian history is that during the incarceration, the Canadian government seized and sold all of their property and possessions without their consent. So it really wasn't just thinking about this idea of like what people had to bring with them, but really thinking about like what people like lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a photo of a fleet of boats that always springs to my mind. That's like all of those boats got sold off by the government and you never got them back. And so what you left behind, and you weren't allowed to return until 4 years after the war. And then what do you have left when you get back? This exhibit is incredible. The amount of work that has gone into this is wild. You have so many great photos. She's the photographer as well of this, not just the curator. She's put this whole thing together. It's on until November at the Museum of Vancouver. Vancouver's history begins here. That's the show for this week. I hope you learned a lot. Big thanks to Masako Fukawa, Kayla Isumura, and Ryan Ellen, show director Derek Wong, Nina Savage, editor Arav, and everybody at employee-owned CHEK Media. Follow me on social media for more stories and check out my digest, the Now You Know BC Almanac at bcbob.ca. You can buy copies there for $25 and subscribe to my newsletter where I do regular giveaways. And of course, I'll see you here on CHEK next week when I'll tell you more stories about this great province of ours. And now you know BC.